Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Power of Not Thinking, How Our Bodies Learn and Why We Should Trust Them, by Simon Roberts, narrated by Jonathan Keeble.
Introduction. How to drive a car. Picture a nondescript single-story office block in a Silicon Valley backstreet. Red, green and yellow bicycles used by Google employees to shuttle between their nearby campuses stand discarded at a junction. There are few clues that this small building contains a group of highly qualified roboticists, computer scientists, and researchers attempting to solve a very difficult problem. This team is trying to replicate something that many people do every day, a skill so natural that most people barely give it any thought and would find it hard to explain how they do it. Driving a car is so commonplace that it is largely unremarked upon. We get in, start the engine, put the car into gear, and drive off. If we have passengers, we are able to talk to them without slowing down. Different conditions, bar the most treacherous, snow, ice, or fog, barely faze most drivers, and unfamiliar roads and novel traffic situations present us with few problems. We quickly become used to our own cars, but we are more than capable of jumping into a different one and driving on unfamiliar roads. These are the fluid, intuitive, and highly adaptable skills of human drivers that the team inside this building is trying to replicate. Across the automotive industry, scientists are trying to create driverless cars that can operate anywhere and under any conditions, a goal known as Level 5 autonomy. To date, test vehicles have clocked up many millions of miles, and progress has certainly been impressive, yet such capability remains some way off, and the jury is still out on whether it is possible. The apparent simplicity of driving belies the fact that it is one of the most complex tasks that humans perform. Drivers don't just steer and navigate, they are constantly performing acts of perception, planning and prediction, as they make sense of what is happening on the road around them, what other people, and not just other drivers, are doing, and what might happen next. And we perform all these tasks instinctively. People maneuvering a large chunk of fast-moving metal that becomes an extension of our own bodies once we're behind the wheel. Peer into the boot of an autonomous vehicle, and you will see how much computing power they require. There is no room for a suitcase, let alone a bag of groceries. A car that's full of computers is a good reminder of how much intelligence is required to drive a car. Talk to the engineers in this Silicon Valley facility for a few minutes about the enormity of the mission they are engaged in. One's a former NASA roboticist who worked on the Mars Exploration rover mission team, and you start to appreciate just how smart humans are and how hard that is to mimic. But what is the nature of this smartness? It's hard to articulate what we are doing as we drive, and any attempt to explain these actions begs more questions than it answers. Consider these instructions on the simple act of starting a car written by the RAC, the motoring organisation in the UK. Put the key in the ignition and turn all the way until the engine starts. Put the clutch pedal down, this is the pedal on the left. Move the gear stick into first gear. Use your right foot to press down on the accelerator, gently, to increase the engine's revs very slightly. Slowly lift the clutch pedal using your left foot until it starts to vibrate gently. Remove the handbrake, and the car should start to move slowly. Increase the revs while slowly raising your foot off the clutch until you are moving forward. If you can already drive a car, these instructions will make sense. If you can't, they are unlikely to help very much. The odds are that if a new driver were to follow these commands, they would under or over rev, lurch forward ungracefully, and stall the car. These instructions are certainly a helpful reminder of the steps required and the order to perform them in, but they seem hopelessly basic when you consider how many individual actions and repetitions of them are required to hop in a car and drive off. No one learns to drive through the memorization of procedures or by following a list of instructions. We're not able to drive because we know what it means to slowly lift the clutch pedal using your left foot until it starts to vibrate. We are able to move off smoothly because we have a feel for how gently to take our foot off the clutch and how much we should depress the accelerator pedal to avoid stalling. And as we learn, we quickly develop a sense of how this varies on different road surfaces or inclines, gaining an intuitive feel for how to perform the action, improving with experience. When you start to learn to drive a car, it is hard, because you are grappling with what is known as propositional knowledge, the discrete steps outlined by the RAC. You are initially grinding through the mental gears as you try to remember what order to perform which task in. Clutch down, engage first gear, bit of accelerator, off the clutch a little more accelerator. Now you're over-revving. Back off the accelerator a little. Come off the clutch too quickly. Stall. Try again. This cycle of learning involves the brain and body working in tandem, as the body learns to process the sensations from how the car responds to our actions. In slightly more technical terms, what is happening is that the instructions or propositions are being translated into what are known as sensory-motor procedures that can be performed effectively without thinking. While a driver continues to think out loud as they perform these procedures, this is a sign that they are still learning. It is only when they don't think about what they are doing in words, remarks anthropologist Maurice Bloch, that drivers are truly experts. Over time, a driver achieves some fluency in their actions. They know when they need to change gear from the sound of the engine and become familiar with the idiosyncrasies of their vehicle. They're able to sense when they're going too fast, and their foot moves from accelerator to brake without conscious thought. They can act without thinking, or more precisely, without thinking about thinking. Their actions become automatic. Their body, and not just their brain, has developed the knowledge of how to drive a car. But how do they understand and take into account others on the road? Take the driver who, looking ahead, sees a person walking into the road. Is he getting into the passenger seat of the parked car ahead, or is he going to cross the road? Is the car at the crossroads waiting for us to proceed, or is it about to move off? Humans interpret these situations without applying much conscious thought to it, but building a machine that can make sense of scenarios like these is very hard. Developing autonomous vehicles is about more than programming actions, procedures, and the rules of the road into a computer. It's a challenge of replicating a capability that is highly practical and adaptable, and which also depends on our ability to process a huge number of signals from the environment that inform our understanding of both what's happening and what we should do next. The human skill of driving a car and the difficulty of building autonomous vehicles illustrates the central premise of this book. That our intelligence does not just arise from our brains. It is not merely the product of our brains processing abstract information or representations of the world, nor can it be programmed as a set of rules or propositions that enables us to think in particular ways or perform particular actions. Instead, our understanding of the world arises from our body's interactions with and perceptions of the world, and it is through these interactions that our bodies acquire knowledge. The knowledge we generate with and store in our bodies is extremely hard to replicate through computing. If we were able to reduce the act of driving to a set of rules and procedures, and if the world and its drivers was entirely predictable, writing algorithms for autonomous vehicles would be reasonably simple. However, every driver and every pedestrian we encounter is different, and unpredictably so. To make matters more complicated still, no scenario a driver confronts is ever the same as one they've experienced before. Driving is a complex task, yet most who set out to learn how to do it are able to acquire and retain the skill. They might not be perfect at it, but they achieve the ability to understand a situation and assess what's important and what the appropriate response might be. And they do all this without thinking about it. We are able to handle the complexity of driving by using our brains and bodies together. Driving a car is a prime example of what I call embodied knowledge, a form of knowledge where we have acquired practical understanding and ability through perception or experience. When we have embodied knowledge, we instinctively know how to act. As the term suggests, It is not knowledge that resides in our brains, but one that comes to inhabit our bodies. In this book, we will encounter embodied knowledge in all sorts of areas of life. We will discover how philosophers, neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, roboticists, and artificial intelligence experts are all hitching their wagons to the idea that the body is critical to the formation and retention of intelligence, an embodied view of knowledge that rejects the idea that it only emerges from and resides in the mind. Instead, this perspective sees the body itself as able to acquire, retain, and use knowledge. When we appreciate how it does this, we can begin to grasp that it is not merely a device for hauling the brain around, but a source of our intelligence. Bring back the bodies. For much of the 20th century, a school of philosophical thought called phenomenology has sought to put the body at the centre of our understanding of how we experience the world. This has, in turn, encouraged disciplines like anthropology to come to new ways of understanding how cultural knowledge is acquired and communicated, and how skills are learned. The flourishing discipline of neuroscience, which might at first appear to be in the brain-focused camp, has demonstrated the indissoluble connection between brain and body. For example, experiments have shown that abstract concepts are understood better when accompanied by bodily experiences. In recent years, psychologists and cognitive scientists, especially those exploring the possibilities of artificial intelligence, speak of embodied cognition, the idea that the mind must be understood in the context of its relationship to a physical body. Their work shows that we think as much with our body as we do with our brains. Relatedly, the idea that we use the world around us as scaffolding for our thinking has gained widespread acceptance. In The Power of Not Thinking, I will explore these theories and the science behind them. In this book, we will encounter people who are putting some of these principles to work, from the Silicon Valley developers swapping brainstorming for body storming to act out how cutting-edge technologies will work, to an ambassador who hitches rides with hauliers to understand how frictionless trade between Britain and Europe works. We will meet a charity worker who puts people through a refugee simulation at the World Economic Forum in Davos to teach them about the experience of displaced people. We will discover how architects learn about aging by putting their bodies rather than their minds to work. And in a Californian national park near the Mexican border, we'll encounter business executives camping during a week-long immersion into their customers' world. I designed and participated in several of the experiences I use to tell the story of how people develop embodied knowledge. Over the course of my career in consulting, I have grown convinced that we should put experience at the heart of how policymakers, global businesses, and other organizations understand the world. I'm an anthropologist and work with many such organizations, and in recent years I've focused on applying the theory and practice of embodied knowledge to how my clients comprehend the world. I was trained to depend not on large-scale data sets, but on my own experience, having immersed myself in other people's worlds. In the mid-1990s, while living among North Indian households to explore the impact of the arrival of satellite television, I experienced the acute embarrassment families felt when Baywatch appeared on their screens. I shared the discomfort of women who averted their eyes or left the room when Pamela Anderson came bounding down the beach in her trademark red swimsuit. This was when it dawned on me that the world is both experienced and expressed through the body. My career working as an anthropologist in consulting has also coincided with a growing dedication within business to big data. Big data analytics relies on millions of data points originating from people's digital footprint and behaviors, as well as massive computing power to make sense of them. Cheerleaders for big data promise profound insights into every aspect of our lives. Big business and policymakers have bet big on capabilities that are all about scale and objectivity, with the goal of producing a detached, rational view of the world. Yet at the same time, the application in business of the relatively esoteric field of anthropology has been booming. Anthropologists work at a very small scale, with sample sizes in the teens rather than the millions, and their principal tool is their own body and the experiences they share with the people they live amongst, rather than data lakes, servers, and computational thinking. On the face of it, the result is the clash between two opposing, incompatible ways of understanding the world. One is of the head, large-scale and objective, while the other is of the heart, small-scale and subjective. It is easy for proponents of one view to dismiss the other. But my belief is that we can make better use of data when we've had embodied experiences that allow us to make sense of it. In other words, since we use both bodies and brains to make sense of our world, though we have tended to focus on the latter to the neglect of the former, it is time to restore some balance. This book is born of my conviction that it is impossible to know the world through data alone, and, more positively, that our bodies are immensely powerful tools for understanding and making sense of data. It is directly informed by my experience of working with business. I have seen firsthand how executives struggle to make sense of reports and abstract data, and how understanding drops into place when they engage directly in other people's worlds. Foundational understanding of the world, derived from direct experience, can allow us to imbue the numbers with meaning and be confident in our judgments about what they are telling us. The world according to the brain. Ask someone to point to the part of their body responsible for their intelligence, and it is highly likely that they will point to their head. The assumption is understandable, given that this is what we've been told to think for centuries. We call clever people brainy, and literary and artistic portrayals of intelligence typically tell the same story. It is what is between our ears that counts. Intelligence, so the story goes, resides in the brain. The ideas of 17th century philosopher René Descartes are usually seen as the starting point for this tendency to grant the brain preeminence in matters of intelligence. His familiar formulation, cogito ergo sum, or I think therefore I am, made the being, sum, contingent on the thinking, cogito. He claimed that the mind merely uses the body to receive inputs and produce outputs, and that the body might mislead the mind. This dualistic view, with the body playing a supporting role to the mind at best, and at worst being a handicap to rational thinking, continues to exert a strong influence today. One significant way in which this brain-focused account of intelligence is borne out is in the way computers are held to be similar to brains. We've been making this comparison since the advent of the computer-punched card reader, but it actually began at around the same time as Descartes was writing, when the idea that our brain was like a hydraulic system gave way to the theory that minute mechanical motions in the brain made thinking possible. In his 1958 book, The Computer and the Brain, the great mathematician John von Neumann brought this comparison up to date, drawing many parallels not just between how brains and computers are built, but how they function. He claimed that the nervous system had the appearance of being digital. The tradition throughout history has been for humans to think of intelligence, and more specifically the brain, in terms of the most advanced technologies of each age. For example, the metaphor of brain as telegraph arose with the arrival of the first commercial telegraph in the 1830s, but after the emergence of machines that could perform logical thinking, a new analogy materialized. The first computers were called electronic brains. Given how powerful computers have become, and given our species' superiority complex, it is unsurprising that we still compare our mind to these machines. Yet while this comparison is tempting, brains and computers really aren't that similar. The brain doesn't operate like a computer. It doesn't run on algorithms or have physical memories, and it doesn't store and retrieve information in the way we commonly think. A computer is a calculating machine that works on the symbolic representations of the world that it is fed, and it follows the rules of the programs that it is running. It is what the cognitive scientist Andy Clark called a disembodied logical reasoning device. New computing systems, especially those designed to create artificial intelligence, may have deployed architectures that mimic neurological processes, but brains and computers are, for the most part, really quite different. When you take a photo of the food on your plate to put on social media, it is represented by a unique sequence of millions of zeros and ones, and to a computer, that is all this picture is. A computer knows nothing about the smell of the food, or the experience of preparing or eating it. Computers are unable to comprehend what this plate of food represents to me or anyone else. Their intelligence relies on the manipulation of abstract symbols and doesn't extend any further. For the computer, that plate of food is nothing but a serving of zeros and ones. Compare this to human interactions with that same plate of food. We can use our senses to taste it, while the smell of it may well trigger powerful memories, emotions, and associations. Humans experience that meal and attribute meaning to it, which they can then communicate or share with others. Our thinking about the food is not just raw cognition, but the result of our experience of it and our ability to make meaning from it. Equating brains to computers comes from a simple shorthand that has been pervasive for many centuries, because Western thought has tended to downplay the role of the body and perpetuate the idea of brains as logical reasoning machines. However, even if comparing human and computer intelligence made sense in terms of how they each operate, which it doesn't, it assumes that human intelligence is solely a feature of our brains, which it is not. We must challenge this received wisdom, though it may feel odd. The current fascination with AI reflects the idea that racks of servers running algorithms can reproduce or even outclass human intelligence. This idea that intelligence resides solely in our brains is taken to its logical and almost comic conclusion by startups like Nectome, which recently began offering a service for uploading the human brain to the cloud. This continues a long tradition of Silicon Valley visionaries and transhumanists, such as Ray Kurzweil, dreaming of human brains isolated from their body and running inside computer simulations. The assumption is that what is in the brain constitutes intelligence, even when it is isolated from the body. It is time to stop neglecting the role the body plays in our acquisition of knowledge, and explore how it is that brain and body combine to deliver what we regard as human intelligence. More profoundly, we might even ask whether intelligence can exist in the absence of a body. This book explores both questions, and will demonstrate that intelligence is corporeal, as well as cerebral. The Janitor. In 2016, Google's DeepMind team announced that artificial intelligence had helped them to reduce the cooling bill in one of their vast data centers by 40%. Some of the world's most sophisticated machine learning experts, from the team whose AlphaGo program famously beat world champion Lee Sedol at the ancient game of Go, had used neural networks to help them predict future temperature and energy usage in a complex, dynamic environment. Data centers are often located in places with cool, wet climates, like the American Pacific Northwest. It was in the basement of an old high school building in Oregon that a team from the microprocessor giant Intel learned the story of a janitor who had supervised an assortment of electric, pneumatic, and mechanical devices that controlled his school's ventilation. This janitor, like many of his colleagues in other schools across the state, had tended to his building for more than a decade and knew its idiosyncrasies, why certain windows didn't shut, which radiators needed bleeding more often than others, and which taps were prone to leaking. But then something changed. In 2006, the Portland public school system installed technology that would allow them to understand what was going on in nearly 80 schools from behind a desk. The laudable aim of this initiative was to increase energy efficiency and manage costs. Sensors were installed, and centralized administrators were given control over data and reports from each school, taking control of the school's systems. The janitor, a friendly figure whose job extended far beyond managing the heating system, was unhappy to have been replaced with temperature sensors and energy usage monitors, and eventually retired, fed up with the powerlessness of his new role. At both the Google data center and the school, computation was being used to monitor and control a building. However, while energy usage and administrative costs at Google fell, the school's bills rose. With children around to leave windows open or fiddle with the thermostat, and with its old leaky buildings, it was a very different environment from Google's state-of-the-art data centers. It turned out that the janitor was difficult to replace, because he had exactly the kind of knowledge that was perfect for managing such an idiosyncratic building. The world we live in looks far more like the school building in Oregon than the Google server farm. It's irregular, unstable, and has a significant number of variables at play, making it hard to be reduced to a series of computable zeros and ones. However, the idea that we can develop accurate models about the world if we collect enough data continues to gain credence. We experience that in our everyday lives when we're asked to evaluate our experience of a shop or airport security on a 5-point scale. Our businesses are run by increasingly strict adherence to data and the models and forecasts they enable. Closer to home, smart devices measure many aspects of our lives, including sleep, steps, or social connections, providing us with what is often presented as objective information. The people our dating apps connect us with, the songs our music streaming services queue up, and the recommendations our shopping apps make are all the result of computational or algorithmic thinking. In 1973, the American sociologist Daniel Bell popularized the term post-industrial society and predicted the rise of an intellectual technology that would, he said, sit alongside the emerging information and computing technologies. What he was anticipating was a way of thinking and understanding the world that corresponded to and was supported by the logic of computing. Society, he suggested, would be characterized by the use of data to describe the world, on which judgments would be based. Bell's prediction now appears prescient. Computing has not just provided the firepower for processing the world around us, it has provided an intellectual framework that claims to be able to map, model, and understand the world. The tale of the janitor in Oregon is the story of two different types of knowledge. One is produced by an array of sensors distributed through a building and the analysis of the data they produce, while the other is a form of knowledge acquired over time by learning about a building as a living entity, with quirks that have to be experienced to be understood. Google's success in using artificial intelligence to lower their electricity bill was due to the fact that these environments are purpose-designed. The similar, if slightly less technologically sophisticated approach taken in the Portland schools failed because these buildings were varied and unpredictable. The embodied knowledge that the janitor had developed of his building enabled him to attend to its systems to keep everything running smoothly. His understanding had been acquired through a body that could perceive changes in the environment and interact with the building's boilers and cooling and heating systems. His knowledge of how these machines behaved, developed through experience, was invaluable in tweaking them to get the required outcome. His understanding of the school extended far beyond the printouts from its newly installed sensors, which made him uniquely able to perform his role. Bodies of knowledge. In order to highlight the differences between a big data-controlled school system and a janitor, we can follow philosopher Sean Gallagher in comparing brains in vats with flesh and blood creatures equipped with beating hearts. Gallagher, author of the influential book How the Body Shapes the Mind, wanted to distinguish between two ways of thinking about a brain. One view is of 85 billion nerve cells and the 150 trillion connections between them whirring away without any connection to the world. A disembodied calculating machine. A brain in a vat is a powerful organ cut off from the world, leaving it unable to interact with its environment. The second view recognizes that human brains are located in bodies that have beating hearts, legs that move them around the world, and hands that allow them to manipulate.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?